pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to also acknowledge we have our Mayor Claire Stewart online, live from New Plymouth, New Zealand. And for that reason, I'll be stepping up as chair by agreement for this meeting this evening. We have all other councillors in attendance. No apologies. May we have someone to confirm the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 19th of May 2022, please? Move Councillor RENE. Second Councillor Queensell. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. We have no mayoral minutes.
Oh, no, it's all right.
We have a petition. Councillor Queensell.
Yes. Do I have to read it down or what do I do?
Yes, please.
Yes. This gentleman has Joyce, has complained about this section of road and nothing has been done by council. We take our life in our hands every time we drive down our street, and this is unacceptable. Or do we have to wait for a fatality to happen to get this problem fixed? This would have to be the most dangerous street in COOROY. Another problem is the intersection at Wattle and Garnet Streets. If you are driving from Emerald Street into Wattle Street and stop at the intersection, waiting to cross over, you cannot even see the oncoming traffic on your right for 2 trees planted right beside the road on the footpath, and it is even worse if there's cars parked there. The traffic going west is only visible if they are on top of the crest. This is a petition of complaint to the Noosa Shire Council from the residents of Wattle Street to COOROY. I'd like to submit that.
I'd like to move the motion there.
Thank you.
Just read that, please.
That the petition submitted by COOROY residents and with 12 signatories regarding concerns about safety issues in Wattle Street and Garnet Street to be received and referred to the Chief Executive Officer to determine the appropriate action.
Second for that, please. Second for Councillor Stockwell. You wish to speak further to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All in favour? Carried unanimously.
Thank you.
We hand that to CEO. Mr. CEO. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Queensell. Next item is a notified motion. We have notified motion from Councillor AMELIA LORENTSON regarding Burgess Creek.
Okay, I'd like to move a motion that requests the CEO to provide a report to a future meeting outlining A, actions to be undertaken by council to manage the Burgess Creek mouth, including erosion management. B, council's current and future plans in relation to the management of outflows and water quality from the Unity Water Wastewater Treatment Plant discharging into Burgess Creek. C, council's obligations as a trustee, including but not limited to 1, council's responsibilities and obligations for stormwater pipes, culverts and other infrastructure which stormwater and treated wastewater are channelled. 2, council's duties in respect of downstream erosion caused to dunes and beaches as a result of stormwater discharge and wastewater outflows from the Unity Water Wastewater Treatment Plant. And D, possible funding options and opportunities from state and federal governments for long-term infrastructure solutions.
So we have a seconder for that, please.
I'm happy to second.
Second for Councillor Queensell. Wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Lawson.
The northern end of Sunshine Beach to Clover Street at Dredging is a reserve under the Queensland Land Act for recreational purposes, of which council is a trustee. Under the Act, Noosa Council is bound as trustee over state land to exercise its duty of care for the land and the beaches under its control. The motion requests that Council resolve the matters addressed in the motion regarding Burgess Creek. Over the last 2 months, I've been meeting with residents regarding the significant damage of the Burgess Creek foreshore and concerns regarding the discoloration of the Burgess Creek flow. They are concerned that the treated wastewater and stormwater flowing out of Burgess Creek is causing possible pollution, possible health risk and significant erosion to our dunes and beaches. The 4-metre drop from the dunes to the beach is a potential source of injury for beach users, and the erosion is threatening public infrastructure, roads and the coastal ecosystem. Historically, Council has dug the creek and redirected the flow into the ocean. Residents have raised concern that failure to have done so over recent months and the recent downpour that they believe has pushed all the stormwater into the creek, plus the treated wastewater from Unity Water, has resulted in the significant foreshore damage. The treated wastewater and stormwater are flowing consistently, eroding dunes by what some residents estimate at 2 metres a day. Over the last 2 months, the CEO and council staff have met with residents, and they've advised residents that action is underway to re-establish the river mouth of the Burgess Creek and redirect the creek discharge to the ocean. This motion seeks details of this commitment, including the following data and information. Unity water figures on amount of wastewater discharged over the last 20 years. The actual amount of stormwater being discharged into the creek, evidence that the footage entering the creek is in fact naturally occurring tannins, and in regards to the warning sign which says the creek water contains treated sewage effluent. How much sewage effluent, what are acceptables, and residents would argue that there is no acceptable level. This motion also seeks short-term and long-term strategies and solutions, such as temporarily barricading portions of the beach where there is a risk of someone being hurt, and other actions such as reprofiling the beaches and sand to stop the dune erosion. Longer-term solutions such as armoured rock revetment systems at the creek mouth or the use of geofabric bags are also requested to be investigated. Further, this motion requests that Council investigates and explores potential partners and partnerships, opportunities and funding with the state and federal government to potentially develop a water management plan. I've used in my report an example from Bondi Beach. In 2012, Waverley Council, for example, built the Bondi Stormwater Scheme, which diverted 50 million litres of stormwater from being discharged into the ocean every year, and they treat that water, the stormwater, so it can be reused for public cleaning, toilets and irrigation. I also want to make reference to an article that I only just read on the weekend about the Mary River rehabilitation, and I'll pass that around after the meeting. About 20 years ago, floods cut away thousands of cubic metres of farmland that released sediments in catchments flowing onto the Great Barrier Reef. I've got a picture of that river repair, which does not look actually dissimilar to, in my opinion, to Burgess Creek. In 2015, earth-moving equipment started reshaping those eroded sand cliffs in sections at the riverbank, and they drove 6-metre-long timber piles, and that have resulted in slowing down the flow of floodwater. Habitat was saved, and there was more than, I think, 45,000 seedlings were planted with the help of Noosa District Landcare, and that power field has slowly disappeared. Simply, the project was a success because of political will, community will, and a long-term investment strategy. Noosa residents, and this is again just food for thought, Noosa residents pay stamp duty and land tax to the state government. And given a recent 36.5% increase in land valuations, there is, in my opinion, a strong case for council to put together a funding package or an investment strategy for the state government. I've got down here a quote from the Queensland government website that gives us an overview of land valuations in the Noosa Shire Council. On the 31st of March 2022, the Valuer General released land valuations for 22,183 properties, with a total value of just over $13 billion in the Noosa Shire Council area. The valuations reflect land values as of the 1st of October 2021 and show that Noosa Council has increased by 36.5% since the last valuation issued in 2019. There have been significant increases within the residential market sectors of existing well-located properties, specifically those located close to the beach. Noosa beaches and our coastal dunes are one of our most important natural assets and they must be prioritised. I take this opportunity also to remind Council that in 2020, Noosa officially became the 10th World Surfing Reserve. We are therefore committed to preserving our coves and surrounding areas. I would therefore like to see consideration of the following, possibly the inclusion of natural assets into our asset management systems. A specific asset management plan, in my opinion, should be developed that allows us to monitor, maintain and renew our natural assets.
Point's been raised, Councillor Lawrence, just something off the topic of the motion.
Oh, okay.
For us. Very worthy material, but off.
Okay, no worries. So Noosa beaches and our coastal dunes are one of the most important natural assets and must be prioritised. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Stockwell.
I'm going to do a small amendment. And that's to item D, to read possible funding opportunities options and opportunities from Unity Water,
Yes.
comma, state and federal governments. So Unity Water before state and federal. I'll just wait for the minutes, secretary.
Okay, so possible funding options and
From
opportunities.
Unity Water, comma, for long-term, then go down to for long-term integrated catchment and coastal management and infrastructure solutions.
I'll second that.
Second.
I do so because one of the things I heard Councillor Lawrenson say is she wanted a water management plan. What we need to consider is all the issues that have been raised here in an integrated context. So there's and I agree that they're good to lump together. In fact, I look back on my new initiative for the budget in 2019 where I said undertake an urban catchment, integrated catchment management project, partner with Unity Water, the schools, water industries in Burgess Creek catchment. It's something that I've put up every budget since. So there is obviously a need to address these issues, and what we've got here is that the link between the creeks and the coast. And while we have got a current issue driving it, the fact that the erosion through the recent events has been more significant than normal, we also know the last time we did re-straighten that bit of creek, we had a lot of people concerned about the fish kill that occurred. So there's integrated approaches needed to make sure what is there. We also know that, I haven't checked the water quality results for probably since 2019, but back then the water quality in Burgess Creek was worse in the area servicing the urban catchment than the part coming from the sewage treatment plant. So we need to realise that if we're looking at water quality at the point of the receiving waters into the ocean, we need to be addressing issues, not just the point source pollution. So, and we know the treatment train at the sewage treatment plant produces a quality of effluent that's probably a higher quality of water going into the creek than in the creek originally. So it needs to be integrated, it needs to be broad, but certainly looking at these options and certainly in terms of doing a partnership approach, as Councillor Lawrenson has argued, is the right way to go. I think that it's good to bring these things to our attention. I applaud Councillor Lawrenson for to bring issues of concern to us in this fashion.
Anyone else like to speak to the amendment? Councillor Stockwell, wish to close?
Can't argue with anything.
Put the amendment. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. That becomes part of the motion. And only Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Stockwell have spoken to the motion.
No, I haven't.
Oh, sorry. Spoke to the amendment. Anyone else like to speak to the motion now?
No.
Councillor Lawrence, do you wish to close?
I've expected everyone to speak to this, so I'm not going to be repeating myself on it. So Over the past months, hundreds of tonnes of beach dunes at Burgess Creeks have been destroyed, and they really are going to continue to do so unless we do something. I've been at the beach now for the last 2 months, whether I'm picking up environmental pollution from the flooding spillage, polyurethane spillage, or whether I'm just talking to councils or getting my dog out of this brown river. In my opinion, we've got an environmental emergency, and we have an obligation as a council that has declared a climate emergency. We have an obligation to respond. So I hope you all support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lawrenson. Put the motion, those in favour? That's unanimous. Carried. Next items, we have no presentations, we have no deputations. First item is Planning and Environment Committee meeting items. Application for material change of use, home-based business, bed and breakfast at 7 BERRIMA Road, Noosa Heads. Item 2, MCU, Planning and Environment Court Appeal number D928 of 2022, minor change to development approval for retail business type 5 vehicle uses, retail business type 2, shop, operational works, signage at 5254 Mary Street, Noosaville. Item 3, development application for reconfiguration of a lot at GLENRIDGE Drive, QUOTATION was referred to the General Committee. Item 4, application for a material change of use, undefined use, motorcycles, scooter sales and repair situated at 16 Winnie Street, Noosaville. Next item, climate change response grants, round 1, Councillor Stockwell.
I wish to inform the meeting that I have a prescribed conflict of interest in this matter in relation to the proposed funding allocations to the Noosa Lions Football Club. I am the current president of the Noosa Lions Football Club and was responsible for the grant applications currently before council. As a result of my conflict, I will now leave the meeting room while the matter is considered and voted upon.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. We have a move for the motion, please. Councillor Jurisic, have a second, please. Councillor Lawrenson, Councillor Jacobs.
No need.
Any other councillors which speak to the motion?
That doesn't include 6.
We're at item 5.
Right, yeah.
Item 5. We put the motion, those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. May Councillor Stockwell be invited to return the meeting, please. Okay, item 6 was referred to the General Committee. Item 7, planning applications decided by delegated authority. May we have someone to move the resolution for...
So moved.
Move Councillor Stockwell, second please. Second Councillor Wegener, all in favour? That's carried. We now move to the Services and Organisation Committee recommendations. Item 1, contract number T quadruple 067, register of pre-qualified suppliers for provision of trade services. Item 2, request for quotation for lifeguard services, Surf Lifesaving Queensland. Councillor Lawrence.
I, Councillor Lawrenson, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in this matter as my daughter Georgia Lawrenson is employed by Surf Lifesaving Queensland as a casual lifeguard. It could be viewed that I have a conflict of interest, however I do not believe a reasonable person could have a perception of bias as my daughter's employment is of a casual nature and not exclusively bound to SLSQ. Therefore there is no benefit or loss specific to my daughter from the outcome of this application. Therefore, I will choose to remain in the meeting room. However, I will respect the decision of the meeting on whether I can remain and participate in the decision.
Councillor Stockwell.
Yeah, I'm happy to move in that regard, that we allow Councillor Lawrenson to remain in the room. We should say why the reason is to that a reasonable person would not have a perception of bias because Councillor Lawrenson nor her daughter stand to receive a personal benefit or loss in relation to this matter, and therefore a reasonable person would trust in the final decision is made in the public interest.
That's seconded by Councillor Stewart. All in favour? Carried unanimously, and Councillor Lawrence did not vote on that motion about the... I believe it's taken a room
Just
online.
scratch it.
Can we have someone to move the motion, please?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Move Councillor Jurisic, second please. Councillor Kinzel was to repeat. Anyone wish to speak to the motion?
I believe it was all said at the previous meeting.
Yeah. All in favour? That's carried. Right, we now come to item 3, Community Grants Program, Community Project Grants Round 1 and 3-year agreements overview. Item 4, Community Program Funding Community Project Grants Round 1 events. Councillor Stewart.
I, Councillor Stewart, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in this matter in relation to the funding recommendation to Noosa Rugby Union Club, Inc. My husband is a member and sponsor and my son plays for this club. Although I have a declarable conflict of interest, I do not believe a reasonable person could have a perception of bias because I believe I do not stand to receive a personal benefit or loss in relation to this funding. Therefore, I will choose to remain in the meeting room. However, I will respect the decision of the meeting on whether I can remain and participate in the decision.
Thank you. Councillor Stockwell.
I'm happy to move on the basis that the Councillor Stewart participates and votes on this matter because Council believes the reasonable person would not have a perception of bias because Councillor Stewart does not stand to receive a personal benefit or loss in relation to this funding, and therefore a reasonable person would trust that the final decision is made in the public interest.
We have a second for that, please. Second to Councillor Finzel. All in favour? That's carried. Councillor Stewart did not vote on the motion.
Sorry.
May we have a...
Sorry, Frank.
That's right. May we have a mover for the council resolution about the Community Development Manager's report about the Round 1 grants. Move Councillor Lawrenson, seconded. Councillor Finzel, all in favour? That's carried unanimously. Now, item 5, Community Program Funding, Community Project Grants, Round 1, Equipment. Councillor Stockwell.
Yes. I, Councillor Stockwell, wish to inform the meeting that I have ascribed conflict of interest in this matter in relation to the proposed funding allocation to Noosa Lions Football Club. I am the current president of the Noosa Lions Football Club and was responsible for the grant applications currently before Council. As a result of my conflict of interest, I will leave the meeting room while the matter is considered and voted on.
Thank you, Councillor Stockwell. Councillor Drusik.
I, Councillor Jerusalem, will move the resolution for us.
Second, please.
Give it a second.
Councillor Finzel, quick out of the box. All right, all in favour? That's carried. May Councillor Stockwell be invited back to the meeting, please. Now up to item 6, Community Program Funding, Community Project Grants, Round 1, Infrastructure. Item 7, Community Program Funding, Community Program Grants, Round 1, Program and Projects. Item 8, Community Grants, 3-year Community Alliance Agreements. I, Councillor Wilkie, inform the meeting I have a prescribed conflict of interest in this matter as I am an executive member, the president of Noosa Arts Theatre, one of the recommended recipients of an alliance grant. As a result of my conflict of interest, I will now leave the meeting room while the matter is considered and voted upon.
Can I get a nomination?
Yeah, I nominate Councillor
Okay.
Councillor Wegner.
Okay.
Councillor Wegner's been nominated. Yeah.
I'll second that, miss.
It's been seconded
second
by
that, Mr.
Councillor
Leader.
Jerusalem. Councillor Wegner, you're now the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is that carried unanimously?
Oh, we
Oh, we haven't
carried.
voted yet.
I'll put the vote. Thank you.
I'm a bit cut out right now, so
Just say the item you had before you.
You just have to put the motion.
Councillor, I'll move the council resolution on this item.
I'll second it.
Or let you say that.
okay. You
Oh,
voted?
does anyone
No,
else?
Is it anybody
No need for any discussion.
And can we put the vote?
Put the vote.
Put it to the vote.
All those in
All
favour?
those in favour? Hands up. That is unanimous.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wegner.
Well done.
Okay, we can have the chair back in the room again.
Quickly.
Thank you. We don't do that too last time.
Karen.
You're evil.
Okay, we're up to, that was item 8. Item 9, Community Grants Program, 3-year signature community event grants. Councillor Stewart.
I, Councillor Stewart, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in this matter in relation to the funding recommendation to Noosa Rugby Union Club. My husband is a member and sponsor and my son plays for this club. Although I have a declarable conflict of interest, I do not believe a reasonable person could have a perception of bias because I believe I do not stand to receive a personal benefit or loss in relation to this funding. Therefore, I will choose to remain in the meeting room. However, I will respect the decision of the meeting on whether I can remain and participate in the decision.
We go around the mulberry bush. I'll move the resolution that council note the declarable conflict of interest by Councillor Stewart. I wish I hadn't got up to speak now because it's killing me. Determined that it's in the public interest that Councillor Stewart participates and votes on this matter because council believes that a reasonable person would not have a perception of bias because Councillor Stewart does not stand to receive a personal benefit or loss in relation to this funding. Oh, excuse me. And therefore a reasonable person would trust the final decisions made in the public interest.
Second, Councillor Lawrenson, all in favour? That's carried. Councillor Stewart did not vote on the motion. Have someone to move the motion, please.
So moved.
Councillor
I'm happy to
Stockwell,
second.
seconded by Councillor Finzel. All in favour? That's unanimous. And we're now item 10. Community grants, 3-year festive season event grants from 1st of July 2022 to 30th of June 2025. Item 11, Regional Arts Development Fund RADF grant recommendations 2021-22. I, Councillor Wilkie, inform the meeting that I have a prescribed conflict of interest in this matter as I am an executive member, the president of the Noosa Arts Theatre, one of the recommended recipients of a RADF grant. As a result of my conflict of interest, I will now leave the meeting room while the matter is considered and voted upon. Thank you, Mr.
You
Secretary.
want a second go, Tom?
No, I don't. I move that Councillor Stockwell.
Thank you. Do you have a second?
I'm happy to second that.
Who seconded it?
Councillor Finzel seconded.
So, councillors, we have a recommendation in front of us. Does anyone wish to move that recommendation?
I'll move the
It
recommendation.
was moved by Councillor, what's your name again? Jurizovic, seconded by Councillor Wegner. Does we wish to discuss? No.
No.
All those in favour? Carried unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, item 12, further report council representation on various boards, external organisations and working groups. And that's it. We have someone to move the resolution on page 16, please.
So
Councillor
moved.
Jurisovic,
Happy to second.
seconded Councillor Finzel, all in favour? That's carried. Now come to item report directed to the General Committee, which is the development application for reconfiguration of a lot, one lot into 8 lots at 60 Glenridge Drive, QUOTATION. Have someone to move.
Amelia's got it.
Amelia, conflict of interest.
I, Councillor Lawrenson, inform the meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in this matter due to my personal relationship with the applicant, Mark Bain, and the Bain family, who are family friends. We've attended social events together and our children have attended school together. As a result of my conflict, I will leave the meeting room while the matter is considered and voted upon.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Stockwell.
I'll move the motion.
Happy to
Second,
second.
please. Second,
Yeah.
Councillor Finzel.
No need to
Speak
talk
the
to
motion.
it? No.
Thrash this out on Monday. Any councillors speak to the motion? Put the motion. Those in favour? That's Councillors Stockwell, Finzel, Wegner and Wilkie. And against? Councillor Jurisovic.
Hand behind you.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
I'm for Frank.
I beg your pardon, Mayor, and
So,
please note that
same.
Mayor Stewart is in favour. And against was Councillor Jurisovic, and that is, the matter is carried. May we please have Councillor Lawrenson back in the room?
Frank out.
Yes. It's next. Now up to item 2 of the General Committee, the Environment Grants, round 17, and Councillor Wegner, you'd like to declare a conflict of interest.
Sorry, something's happened to the COI. Just a moment.
You can read.
That's this item is report. I'll agree with okay. I, Councillor Wegener, inform the meeting that I have a prescribed conflict of interest in this matter in relation to the application by Country Noosa, as I am a committee member of that association. As a result of my conflict of interest, I will now leave the meeting room while the matter is considered and voted on. And I have stepped down from the board, but I will still
Yeah.
leave the room.
Thank you, Councillor Wegner.
Thanks for clarifying.
Councillor Stockwell.
I'll move a motion, and it is slightly different to that which was in the original staff report, so I'll read through just the changes. I'll just wait for, once again, if you can just scroll down, thank you, Linda. So the changes are in regard to the amounts for a number of projects. The first one being the woody weed repair and removal with a revised, well, the amount that will be offered in the grant is $29,695. The next one is a find a frog in February water watch training, and the revised motion for the grant is $18,000. Noosa River integrated mapping, $3,580. Research portal for public accessibility, $5,000. Sustainability forums for NRM groups, $20,000. And if you keep scrolling down, please. Noosa Environmental Education Hub, $15,000. Noosa Integrated Catchment Association, $22,500. Hinterland Bush Links, $20,000. NICA Urban Wildlife Gardens, $7,500. Country Noosa, $3,300. Zero Emissions Noosa, $20,000. And
Any variations?
is there another clause up the top that I didn't read out? And adding item C, which says amend the allocation of grant funding for environment grants in the draft 2022-2023 budget accordingly.
Can we have a second for that, please?
Yes, sir.
So, councillors, we deferred this item to allow us to consider the submissions to the draft budget. We've done that, and as a result of that draft submissions, we were all made aware of a potential additional that we may wish to respond to the responses which suggested we should put more into the environment, and we are all aware that we've come to a potential petition on the draft budget which would support the level of grants that I have recommended.
Thank you. May councillors speak to the motion? Put the motion, those in favour? It's carried. Invite Councillor Wigner back to the meeting. Thank you, Leo.
Sorry, it was the COI was there.
Next is another item which is the application of material change of use multiple dwellings at 28 EENIE Creek Road, Noosaville, was referred to the ordinary meeting. We'll deal with that later. Tender consideration plan, Noosa spit, dredging and beach nourishment. I'm preparing Noosa Environment Strategy Monitoring Report for financial performance report.
Sorry, just if we can go back to the item 2.
Item 2, which is the tender consideration plan, Noosa spit, dredging and beach nourishment.
I did ask for some information to come to the meeting in regard to the triggers. Was that forthcoming? I didn't see anything.
Just being advised that no, that hasn't been provided to the meeting.
Okay. I voted against it again at the committee, so I don't need to raise it again.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Item 4 was financial performance report. Item 5, confidential not for public release incoming CEO report. The summary report has been circulated for its making public as well. We have a council resolution that all the reports of the general committee be adopted. Please, we have a mover. Moved Councillor Lawrenson, seconded Councillor Pinzell. All in favour? It's carried unanimously. Let's do it online. We now have a report direct to the ordinary meeting, which is a further report, the development application for material change of use for multiple housing, 90 dwelling units at 28 EENIE Creek Road, Noosaville. We have the manager of planning and environment, and also planning development manager Kerry Court here also. Councillor, do you have any questions of staff? Councillors like to move a motion?
Question to start, if I may.
Question, Councillor Wilson.
Councillor Wegner and I took the opportunity to go and have a bit of a look at this site this morning, and we noticed a chain wire fence between this property and the civic development as it currently stands. I just wanted to clarify whether that chain wire fence, as it currently stands, defines the environmental area, the 10-metre environmental area buffer that currently exists, and if we could just see exactly where that sits up on the map.
Councillor, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Sorry, we got from. I thought What do you get from Patrick?
Yeah, I understand you have spoken to the officer today about it. We can put the mapping up if you'd like to look at it a little bit further, but I don't know where that chain wire fence is.
Okay.
My question is, have the traffic engineers considered the impacts of this development on busy intersections? There's going to be 300 plus residents in this precinct, and I'm concerned that the roundabout, in particular the one off RENE Street, going to Noosa Yamundi Road, Beckmans, that intersection is already congested and busy. Have those impacts been considered? Are they even required, and are they required under our planning scheme?
So as part of the development of the planning scheme, 2020 Noosa plan, strategic planning department engaged an external traffic engineer to review some of the intersections and also assist them in developing that scheme. So having a look at the zoning that they were considering for these sites and ensuring that the intersections would work. So the advice is it will, and that the intersections will continue to function with this development. As the business centre further progresses, and we are expecting potentially some larger scale developments, we will need to review those larger scale developments individually, particularly the commercial developments, because they generate a lot more traffic movement, typically than residential. But for this development, those intersections will continue to function.
Kerry, on Monday we discussed 7 conditions that the applicant had questions about and made representations about. Could you point out any changes that have been made to the conditions as a result of your further consideration of their submission, please?
Okay, sorry. So just, it is in the further report to Council in the order meeting, but just to summarise those for Council and community listening in tonight. The representations were in relation to condition 5, which is the study rooms. And that's about making sure that room is not used as a bedroom, which the applicant's not proposing its use for a bedroom, but also importantly ensuring it has sufficient light and ventilation. So the applicant requested some changes to that, and we have made some changes to give them some options around how they might ensure that it's not used as a bedroom. So that's in the conditions. Then the applicant looked at the requested performance bond, seeking that condition to be deleted. And the officers are recommending that that condition remain. It is consistent with our planning scheme policy to have a performance bond on all developments. It provides a surety that the conditions would be fulfilled, and that's returned on completion of the development and meeting those conditions. We have though looked at the amount. The amount of 100,000 was originally recommended to Council, and we've revised that down. And the reason we've done that is there's not a substantial amount of civil works required as part of the development. That's really being completed as part of the subdivision works. And there is a second bond required, specifically in relation to trees. So we have reduced that bond down to 50,000 is the recommendation now.
Condition 14, as I understand.
Oh, sorry, condition 14, that's right.
Yeah.
Condition 20, there was some concern by the applicant. It requires each of the units to have access to an outdoor clothesline. There was concern that it was the applicant's interpretation that that meant each unit had to have its own separate clothesline. And I think we've clarified with the applicants that that's not required. Really what is required is that they just have access to a communal clothesline. So we're not expecting 90 clotheslines on the site. So there's no change to the condition. We think it deals with that adequately. And there's now a report on the table in the public domain that clarifies exactly what's required. Condition 34 was in relation to car parking. So the condition at the moment calls for a reduction in the number of parking spaces required for the development. to meet the planning scheme's requirement. The scheme actually sets a maximum number of car parking spaces in our centre zones, and that's to try and reduce the reliance on private cars and encourage more use of public transport. So the applicant is concerned that that will not be sufficient for the development, and we have made no change in relation to that because it's consistent with those strategies. The next condition that was requested for reconsideration was condition 47C, which was really around how the fencing requirements for protection of that environmental covenant area, or that environmentally zoned land, environment management I think it's called, environment conservation zone. So the applicant did not support that, but we consider that required. And have I just got the right condition? So just checking here. It's D, yeah, sorry, to lead you astray there. It's D. D required, in line with that condition for 9 parking spaces to be removed. We requested that to be removed. We've requested that to be removed from the basement and replaced essentially with some landscaping coming from the basement through the podium to achieve better separation between the buildings. The applicant's indicating that that's not economically, it's not desirable, and they would prefer to see that condition deleted. Officers have maintained that condition and still recommending that. We think it's a good outcome visually and environment when viewed from Hoffman Drive. Condition 53 again was related to a bond for the trees. The condition currently requires a bond of $30,000, and that would be lost if there's damage to the trees. The applicant was seeking that to be removed. We have not made any changes to that condition or recommended any changes. Condition 56 was in relation to a chain wire fence, and sorry, this is where my confusion before. There's a requirement for a fence along Covenant J as well as the 10-metre strip that's zoned environmental management and conservation. We've made some minor changes to that just to clarify the options for the applicant and what sort of fencing could be provided along there. And we've just clarified the objective really, suggesting that it should be a wildlife fence, fauna-friendly fence to allow movement. But the style of fencing is up to the applicant there, just needs to meet that objective. Alright, so that was condition 56, and at the end of the report you'll see there's an additional condition recommended in relation to waste management, green waste in particular, and that came from some questions on the floor by councillors and whether we've adequately catered for that. So we've included an additional condition in relation to that.
Thank you, Brian.
I wish to move a motion. It is as within the agenda with some other changes. The other changes start condition 34, and that's to say a maximum of 134 rather than 125 car spaces, and in B below that of 3 disabled parking spaces within the total. And if we keep going down to the next one, please. In 47, to reflect to the change in that car parking, rather than the landscaping protruding from the podium level where the 9 spaces were removed from, it will now read of the provision of mature landscaping of very mature heights between 2 metres and 6 metres with appropriately designed deep planter boxes at podium level between buildings A and B. And then addition of C, that's the grounds upon which find that there is sufficient reason to vary officers' recommendation in regard to maximum car parking for the development, given the desired residential outcomes sought within the high-density residential precinct.
So seconded.
Second, Councillor Stockwell.
I do so. I won't talk to the changes to start with. I'll talk to the substantive development. The substantive development achieves 9 out of 10 in terms of what we were looking for when we developed the first draft of the planning scheme. The one that doesn't do was the requirement in the planning scheme that the state government put a line through that was an inclusionary zoning principle of having some social housing on the site. But in terms of the nature, the scale, the type of units, being all small units, the predominance of 1 and 2 bedroom units, the fact that the eventual outcome, and I thank staff for really holding the line in terms of ensuring that we do get a Noosa style look and feel, because it is probably one of the larger unit developments that we've had around town for quite a while. You know, probably the ones at the Alton built down on Lake Wyber is probably of similar scale to this. So it is quite a large development. It is meeting the housing crisis. And it's really important to understand that the type of accommodation provided in these units will suit the people who are finding it most difficult to find a house or a unit that's within their budget at the moment. And we have heard, and though it's not a consideration in planning, that there is a lot of market interest in these lots. I'll then go to the variations I've made to the staff recommendation, and the key one is there is regard to car parking. And it's important to understand that we use precincts in this particular location under a major centre zone to provide this council this opportunity, to provide it as an opportunity to have impact assessment so we could really look at it. We always wanted it to be a high density residential development, whereas the maximum car parking provision was really aligned to the concept of shop top housing in the commercial area. We didn't want mixed use developments in our centre zones that were allocating, you know, the ground floor to car parking rather than to the retail or whatever the mixed use was. Other places on this site, in the village business type precinct on this site, I think we should stick to the maximum. But in the zone, the precincts which are currently identified for high density residential, I think it's totally appropriate to adopt standard high density residential parking requirements. And the standard high density residential parking requirements would allow for 134 car spaces. And what does that mean in reality? It means that 1 and 2 bedroom units will have 1 car space, and 3 bedroom units will have 2. And that's probably a realistic requirement, because if we're looking at 90 units with no on-street parking, and we want this this is all for permanent residents, the chances of people owning a 3 bedroom unit having mum and dad with a car is probably quite high, or having, you know, multiple adults living together in the units quite high. So the concept of this area, as opposed to, you know, say if it was in the Noosa Junction where we want to limit the maximum, I think it would be counterproductive to reduce those 9 spaces. And you know, the concept of trying to get a better vegetation buffer between A and B is achieved through other ways. For me, I think it is a good development. It meets the scheme in most of the criteria, with a few tweaks. The tweaks we talked about on Monday, but I think they're worth repeating. The tweaks in terms of height was to achieve a Noosa look and feel, and I always support developments if the only thing that's over the height is because they want to increase the pitch of the roof and go to, you know, in this case going to 12 degrees. That is a good design outcome. That is more in keeping with the planning scheme intent than a flat roof that keeps it under the 12 metres. We're looking at minor variations to the maximum allowance in each block, because we asked them to actually articulate and align the building so it didn't look like it reduces the sense of scale and bulk to the street. So once again, the minor variation is more achieving the intent of the scheme and what we want to achieve with design with development such as this. Now for us, we call it high density residential development. Everywhere else calls it medium density, but for us, it's still below the tree height, and I think that's really important in terms of what the height. Noosa's planning scheme from the 80s have always had the concept that if you stand on Mount Mbia or you stand at the lookout just over the Shire off Duke Road there in Panorama, when you look down to the beach, what you see is trees. And it's really important that these buildings won't protrude above the trees. And it'll be a continuation of this, getting more people. It's slightly higher density than what we're used to seeing, but it is something that achieves what we set out to achieve, and that's to provide more affordable, smaller dwellings that meet the demographic that is most in need.
Thank you, Councillor Sopra. Whoever wishes to speak to the motion? Councillor Stockwell, you wish to close?
No. You stand on?
Yeah,
Yeah, Tom.
I would like to make an alternative motion, or motion to defer this decision tonight. Is this,
I guess
this is right here.
It's a procedural motion.
The procedural.
Yeah. Sure, move Councillor Whitmer. Have a seconder.
Happy to second
So you're talking about the reasons for deferral.
The reasons for deferral are, I understand basically why this has been approved, but I couldn't explain it to somebody that comes up to me and says, how could you possibly approve this? Because it doesn't seem to fit their concept of what Noosa is. It appears to me to be a very cramped inner city development lifted up and dropped into Noosa. It's tight. The oval, when we look at the diagram and you see it when oval.
Point of order.
So
He's talking about the merits of the application, not the deferral motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
The reasons for why you would like more further time for council review of the development, please, Tom. What are you hoping to achieve with the deferral?
I'm hoping to have to understand this better. I do not understand why there aren't tanks, why there's giant roofs there, but there's no tank water. I don't understand why there's no social housing aspect, why there's no disabled housing aspect, why there's no affordable housing, because the mayor has made such a big deal. This has been a focus of this council, and we have this as a template, as a precedent. So with approving this, I want to understand why all of the Stockwell sites, all of the apartments that are going to be going in there, all of the units will not have social housing, not have disabled housing, not have affordable housing, not have water tanks, and not even have really room for clothes, for drying areas, for drying your clothes. I just see this as a non-Noosa, and maybe it is with the plan, but I need to be brought on the journey. I think the public needs to be brought on the journey. I need to be able to explain to the public if this is approved, why it was approved when it just, and the gestalt, when Joe and I walked around there today, and I was looking
Point
at
of
it.
order. Still not talking to the deferral.
Yeah, well, I need to be brought on. I need to be brought on the journey because I just don't understand it. I'm a council.
Okay. Question for staff: if we were to defer this tonight, is this considered a deferred? A deemed refusal? Does the applicant have the right to deem it as a refusal?
So the application is impact accessible, which means it will not go deemed approved if council does this, because the decision is due currently on the 16th of June. To go deemed refusal, the applicant would have to lodge an appeal in the Planning and Environment Court, basically saying council has not decided this matter, it's deemed refused, and then ask the court to make that decision and go through that process. I wouldn't expect that's only happened once in my time, in the last 22 years. It is unusual for an applicant to take that approach.
So I'm going to speak against the motion. The reason that the council gave for deferral says I haven't done enough work to fulfil my statutory responsibility as an assessment manager. He's employed as a councillor with requirements under the Queensland Planning Act. And the Queensland Planning Act makes it really clear that we must consider, and I'll talk this number section 60, must decide to approve, if an application is properly mined, we requires the code assessment and the assessment management to carry out the assessment. Oh, I've got the wrong thing because that's code assessable. What it says is we, as an assessment manager, have to consider the planning scheme. Now, Councillor Wegner listed, I don't know why it doesn't have all these things. It's really simple. The simple question is, they don't have it because it's not in the planning scheme. So it's an irrelevant consideration. We can't defer it because Councillor Wegner wants to understand why things weren't put in the planning scheme. Most of those things we tried to put them in and the state said no. It's important to understanding that we have a policy here about our role as councillors and others in assessment management. And that councillor responsibility goes to the responsibility on us as councillors. And us on councillors, we have a policy that says it's up to us to make sure we've read all the material and we understand it. Now, I understand this case when things come to ordinary meeting, we've only had just over a week to come to grips with it. But I think that's enough time. Okay? It's up to us to understand this application by the time it gets to here. It's not up to us to say, we've got a housing crisis, here's the biggest lot of housing that's going to come here to meet the needs of people who might be, you know, it'll have flow-on effects all the way through to the homeless because the more you take out of other rental stock, it'll flow all the way down because I don't understand it. That's not acceptable. That's not useful. That's not showing leadership. The fact you can't understand it or you think it might have a negative public reaction has nothing to do with your role as a statutory assessor of a development application. And that's the reason why no one should vote for this motion.
Councillor Lawrence.
I won't be voting for this motion, but in defence of Councillor Wagner, I'd also like to mention our statutory duty in terms of our conduct. Part of our code of conduct is we need to commit to exercising proper diligence, care and attention. And I respect Councillor Wegner in his commitment to due diligence. I won't be supporting this motion, unfortunately.
Councillor Grizzly.
Likewise, I won't be supporting the motion. I do understand the intent that, and what Councillor Wegner would like to see in developments of this type. We've had our assessment managers and our planners look over this. I've assessed made my assessment of their assessment, and I concur with it. With the changes that have been undertaken to this point, I think the applicant made some relevant points for change, and I can concur that the changes that have been made, including what Councillor Stockwell has done, fulfils the needs and the elements of the planning scheme, and as such, I can't agree to defer the motion because I believe this application does what it was intended to do with regards to the planning scheme.
No,
Don't
I
have
want
to.
to speak.
Look, I'm not going to support the motion either. It is up to us to meet staff, to have our questions answered if we do have any regarding the report and the decision. We've had this report since mid last week when we first received it, and we received it at the same time as the rest of the public. It's sufficient time for us to meet one-on-one with the planners to ask the questions. We've had briefings, particularly around the reason why there is no social housing in there. I appreciate we all would have preferred to have seen that, and Councillor Wegner tonight asked the question, why is there no social housing in there? We did try to make this an inclusionary housing zone and mandate a percentage of the units to be given over to social housing as part of the planning scheme amendments, but they were refused by the state interest check. That's the reason why. The council is quite within their right to vote against it if they have other objections, but to defer it because there are unanswered questions, I can't support that as a sufficient reason for deferring the motion and then putting it on the applicant, or putting the applicant in a situation where they may have to go to the Planning and Environment Court. That's the reasons why I won't support it, but I do appreciate that you really do, all councils do want to get their head around something and be able to explain it. Councillor Wegner, wish to close?
Yes. I wish I had the preamble to our planning scheme. There's several pages there of wonderful, colorful language, but it guarantees a high level of livability. And this development does not deliver a high level of livability. It is not to the Noosa standard. I don't believe it is. That's why I wanted to learn more.
Thank you, Councillor Wiggin. Those in favour? Councillor Wiggin. Those against? Councillor Juricic, Lawrenson, Stockwell, Stewart, Finzel and Wilkie. The motion's lost. We go back to the original motion to which Councillor Stockwell has spoken. Any other councillors speak to the motion? Councillor Juricic.
Yeah, look, I concur with all of the points delivered by Councillor Stockwell. With regard to the parking, I support the change with regard to parking. There is no on-street parking on Hoffman Drive. As a result of that, I think it's pertinent that there are those additional parking spaces for not only residents but also visitors to the region. If there are no spaces, if there is no on-street parking, where are visitors going to park? Well, there are 9 above ground spaces. I believe that an additional 9 below ground spaces gives that provision and allows a little bit more flexibility for the residents with regard to who can come and go and where they can stay. There are no other parking facilitations within the close proximity of this, so the changes to the parking area are one that I support. I also support the clarification with regard to the fencing and all the other elements that were clarified there, in particular the perimeter of the dog off leash area to be fenced. I believe the applicant was happy to see that, or was intending to do that anyway. I'm happy to see it here as a condition, because I think that given that this planning application deals with an element of cat control, I think there's an element of dog control also required when a dog off leash area is provided in a residential complex of this nature.
Thank you. Councillor, speak to the motion. Councillor Stockwell, you wish to close?
No, I don't think so.
Put the motion. Those in favour? Councillor Juricic, Lawrenson, Stockwell, Stewart, Finzel and Wilkie. Those against? Councillor Wigner. The motion is carried. We have no confidential sessions, no public question time. The next ordinary meeting will be held on the 21st of July 2022, Council Chambers. There are no other